Okay, let's do it. All right. Okay, so what am I doing? All I know is I drank some of my coffee, but I also have a cup of tea. So in my brain, this was tea, and then it was I drank coffee, and it tasted exceptionally bad. And so, have you ever had that happen where you think the wrong thing is in the cup, and now my brain is stuck on this? Okay, so today, we've got just a couple of slides left on youth and kind of health, and then we're going to move into kind of youth and technology and talk about Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which should be fun. It's quite an extensive unit. It's quite an interesting book. Came out last year. So I guess we ended off on this slide last time. And obviously, we've been talking a couple classes now, youth mental health crisis. And really, I guess like the takeaway, if you're going to take anything away from it, we see a lot of indicators of mental health going in I think, the wrong directions for a lot of our young people, starting somewhere around 2010, 2012. Things take kind of a turn for the worse. There's a COVID effect, but the declines started prior to COVID as well. So, and we ended off on this slide, which again is not by me. I'm just reporting to you what others have found, suggesting that these some of these differences in mental health, right, our depression scores and our kind of mental health conditions do seem to track to some extent around questions of political ideology, with conservatives being sort of less likely to report these things than liberals, and liberal women, especially young liberal women, right, between 18 and 29, being the most likely to have been diagnosed with a mental health condition, and then to have high depression scores. Like, we don't have this one bracketed out by age. We just have female and kind of liberal ideological persuasion. But the same thing basically holds. Okay, now I said I would provide you with something maybe in way of an explanation here. Okay, so here I want to kind of bring this down to what's called locus of control and self-derogation. Okay, so we look at self-derogation, right? So that's these statements on the side, right? Basically, statements about what a person thinks about themselves, and especially negative statements, right? I don't feel like I have much to be proud of. Sometimes I think I am no good at all. I feel I can't do anything right. I feel that my life is not very useful. I swear, the first time I put these up, a student commented in the Slido, "Have you been reading my diary?" And I was like, "Oh, that's so sad." So yeah. All right, so self-derogation. And what do we see? Self-derogation amongst 12th graders, right? So agreement with these statements. And again, this is from our long-term study, Monitoring the Future. And we have this, going back to 1977. And we see a big spike here right around, again, 2010, 2012, somewhere in there for all of the groups involved, right? All of our groups involved basically show much more self-derogation, right? The scale runs between 1 and 5. Strongly disagree with each statement to strongly agree with each statement, right? So strongly disagree is a 1, strongly disagree is a 1, strongly agree is a 5. So what do we see? In terms of self-derogation, so you strongly agree with this, you strongly agree with this, you strongly agree with this, strongly agree with this. Obviously, our leader here is liberal girls, followed by liberal boys. Conservative girls, conservative boys, bringing up the rear with conservative boys being kind of far behind. Okay, so there's obviously something going on here in terms of liberal boys and girls being more likely to express self-derogation, right? These self-derogating statements at higher rates. And it's, tracks across this ideology pretty strongly. Okay, so what's on our next slide here, or our next little part? This I think you would call locus of control, right? So what is a locus of control, right? Do you feel like, where do you feel the control in your life sits? Do you feel like you control your own life, in which case you have an internal locus of control? Or do you feel like there are forces outside of your life broadly governing things that are making it difficult, that control your life, right? That you don't control your life. External forces control your life. Okay, so what do we see on our handy-dandy little chart of external locus of control? One of the things we see, whenever I try to get ahead, something or somebody stops me, right? So that's an external locus of control. We see that statement kind of most common amongst liberal girls and conservative boys, with liberal boys quite a bit lower and conservative girls quite a bit lower. Okay, so again, kind of what is going on here? So clearly, oops, I didn't mean to cross liberal girls off. Liberal girls and liberal boys clearly are showing signs of like self-esteem, self-confidence problems, right? That they're agreeing with these 4 statements to a much higher degree than their conservative kind of counterparts, right? So that is a concern. And what it might be related to potentially is a political ideology. It's not entirely clear how, like what the mechanism that would translate sort of liberal politics to this kind of higher degree of self-derogation is. That's not entirely clear, but we definitely see, people who identify as liberal having higher levels of self-derogation. And what we see is 2 groups that seem to think that their lives are not being controlled by them, right? Conservative boys and liberal girls. So I think, if we talk about our conservative boys, right? Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Come on, eraser. I need you now. All right, fine. I'm just going to erase everything. Take that. Okay. All right. So, external locus of control, right? So we see this amongst conservative boys. And I think we can kind of recognize here, in a sense, what's going on. We'll talk about it when we talk about Jonathan Haidt, and I hope to get to Richard Reeve at the end of the course. I just haven't had a chance to put it all together. And that's his book of Boys and Men, which is really interesting, kind of look at what he thinks is a crisis of boys. But clearly kind of conservative boys seem to think that there are forces that are controlling their lives that they can't contend with. They're not in control. And I think you can see this manifest, right? Oh, for the love of all things holy. You can see this manifest in things like MAGA, right? I'll show you a picture on the next slide, one you don't have, but I think it's interesting, right? You see this manifest in things like MAGA. I think we also see it potentially manifested in things like, I don't know, aptly, I was going to say aptly or poorly named manosphere, right? Figures like Andrew Tate. I think to a less toxic extent, certainly Jordan Peterson, right? But people who are, appealing to young men who feel like they are being left behind somehow. And I mean, what do we know about our young men, right? They're falling behind educationally. I think we kind of talked about that. We talked about education, right? They're less educated than their female peers. A lot of their career paths have been sort of left behind, right? Especially, those that aren't sort of university bound or oriented, right? In terms of manufacturing, those sorts of things, that a lot of those jobs have left. And I think what you're seeing in that kind of external locus of control, which, by the way, doesn't manifest to good things. Feeling like you have no control over your life manifests to bad things, right? So you're going to see the kind of cultural reaction in things like MAGA, like the manosphere, right? Someone, I don't want to be, I mean, it's not like I've shied away from criticizing people in this course, but I don't want to be like, pejorative about it. But a lot of these folks, right, are hucksters, right? They're hucksters. They're trying to sell boys on a particular brand of thing that's going to solve that problem, right? I don't even want to talk about him. I don't want to talk about Andrew Tate. He's gross. I'm very rarely in favor of like shooting someone into space, but I think with Andrew Tate, admitted pornographer, pimp, and human trafficker, I might make an exception. What did Stalin say? No person, no problem. Anyway. Oh, I'm sure if Andrew Tate didn't exist, another Andrew Tate would pop up to take his place. Maybe his brother, whatever other Tate boy is. Anyway, enough about the Tate brothers. I Tate them. That was a terrible joke. You should not all have laughed at that. Oh, okay. All right. Is that a sneeze? That was the quietest sneeze ever. Bless you. Okay. So, right, this is, we see in our young men feelings that they lack control in their lives, right? And that conservative ideology seems to be pushing them in that direction, which again is going to come to bad things. I will talk about this on the next slide. But the same is true for liberal girls, right? So why? What's going on with liberal girls? So I do think, to some extent, the kind of overriding discourses that have been aimed at young women, right, are in some cases, that they are oppressed, right? That there's, and again, not all of it is without merit. That they are subject to the patriarchy, right? That their reproductive rights are being snatched away, or always at risk of being snatched away. Hey, look, we're going to an election. Is someone going to talk about abortion? I bet you they will. I missed an R. Patriarchy, right? Even though no mainstream political party would touch, in Canada, would touch abortion with a 90-foot pole, because it would be political suicide. But there's oppression, patriarchy, a lot of these discourses aimed at women, even some that are a little bit inaccurate, right? When we talk about, gender wage gaps, it's often simplified in such a way as to hide some of the ways that women have actually made a lot of progress in terms of their wages. But again, all of these things, right, tend to put your locus of self-control externally. There are evil forces, the patriarchy and such, controlling your life, and you really have no control over it. And this seems to have appealed strongly to liberal girls, and again, it is moving them in this direction of thinking that they don't have control over their own lives. All right, so no one's yelling at me on the slide. Okay, I must not have said enough wrong things today. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. I grabbed this off of my Twitter today. So this comes out of survey, Center for American Life Gallup poll. Social science. Okay. And the Gallup is interesting because they do a lot of international polling. That was supposed to be an arrow. It failed. Okay, what does this kind of show? So, globally, or at least in these 4 places, what we're actually seeing is a divergence in terms of kind of young men and young women in terms of their ideology, right? Young women moving in a more liberal direction. Wow, South Korea, young men really took a hard turn down the old conservative path. Like quite the sharp turn there. Okay, but you see, right, in the US, we see a similar thing. Young men becoming more conservative, young women becoming more liberal, right? And it's pretty consistent. The UK has the snakiest looking path. Yeah, young women were like up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Okay, right? And young men, became a little bit more liberal and then kind of turned the other direction. Okay, so what do we have going on here? We have a kind of, except for the UK, we'll forget about the Brits. We have a political divergence, right? Our male, female, kind of the young part male, female, are diverging politically. They're becoming more polarized. So this has some effect, right? I think we are talking both groups potentially having an external locus of control. So both groups potentially feeling more like there are these forces governing their lives that they aren't in control of, right? So that is bad. They're also heading in opposite directions. And so what you potentially have is a lot of young men who are conservative and a lot of young women who are liberal. And both of them feel like somehow they are hard done by a system, by these external forces. They just think they're different external forces, right? Now, again, why does that matter? And I will say, I've kind of heard this anecdotally, because I teach another class. It's an online class. It's in the fall. It's fabulous. I don't know if it's fabulous, actually. It's called the Sociology of Youth and Religion. It's not in sociology. It's over at St. Joe's. But one of the things that I do in that class is I have like discussion forums. And one of the kind of anecdotal things that came out was a lot of the young women in the course really commenting that what they've seen in their peer group is a big turn of the men their age kind of becoming much more conservative as they're, and I think they don't maybe recognize it, as they're becoming more liberal. And it's leaving a big gap where neither side finds the other one particularly appealing because of this ideological mismatch, right? And when it comes to relationship, values are important. So we've seen this kind of manifest, and I'm getting out of data here to anecdote, and just remember the plural of, or the singular of data is not anecdote. So some of this might just be my impressions, but I think it's sort of accurate, nevertheless, as we all do with our impressions. We've seen certain things, right? Kind of springing up on the internet. Things like the trad wife sort of influencers, right? Again, appealing, I think, to those men who've moved in that more conservative direction, and who feel that greater locus of control. The one that I will absolutely, I don't know, it blows my mind. Again, some of my students are like, yeah, actually, I've seen that in real life. Men, for the first time ever, they're becoming more religious. Men have always been less religious and more likely to trend downwards in religion until a few years ago, where this trend sort of split. Now, at the same time, women are becoming less religious. So we have these kind of broad divergences, and I think it's all related to these separate kind of locus of controls, right? Each of them feels an external locus of control, and they're reacting to it in different ways. Women by becoming more liberal, men by becoming more conservative, but it's also causing a bunch of relationship problems, right? That women are finding it hard to find compatible men because they don't share the same values, and men are finding the same thing, right? And then this leads us into all sorts of problems, and I don't want to talk about incels, but I just did. But like this mismatch in values makes it hard for people to partner up, and it's causing problems. Okay, wasn't it like, oh, what was it? Just recently there was this TV show, but what is it? Where they got to the altar and the woman like left the guy at the altar because what's that? Love is Blind, right? Yes, Love is Blind. I only saw the clips that circulated on the internet, right? And they got to the altar and she's like, actually, you're too politically conservative for me. And then like a dope, he's like, well, could we keep seeing each other? And it's like, dude, it's over. Come on, like, move on. So anyway, yes, we saw this literally on Love is Blind recently. Right, anyway, I'm going to stop talking about this slide. I think what's happening, I think it's really interesting, and I think we're starting to see these divergences, and it's causing problems because there's both groups are moving towards this external locus of control, but they have different evaluations of where that locus is, and it's causing an even bigger gap between young men and young women. Though these people all look very happy. They're cheerful, though technically they all have different values and they all hate each other. So, okay. I think this is my last slide. This is my last slide for this. That only took 22 minutes, right? I'm good at time management. Okay. As always, good at time management. Okay. So, social media. We're going to talk about social media in the next unit when we talk about Jonathan Haidt's book. Percent of UK teens depressed as a function of hours per week on social media. Again, this is taken from, this is graphed by Haidt and Twenge, based on data from this particular study. Clinical depression symptoms by hour per weekday of social media use. And what we see, right, as our hours increase, our depression increases for both boys and girls, but it is much more severe for girls. That doesn't mean boys are doing great. We'll talk about them as we go forward, but that is the topic for my next lecture, which I swear I posted. Please tell me if I didn't. Huh? I did. Huzzah. I'm good at one thing today. Making people angry by talking about Andrew Tate and posting the lecture I wanted. Victory. Next class, I get to talk about mixed methods, which I'm sure is going to be an absolute barn burner. Everybody loves talking about how you mix quant and qual. It's just, is there anything sweeter in life? That's a rhetorical question. It's Intro to Methods. It's the worst class in the whole universe. And I love it so much. Okay, I have lost. There we go. Okay, so. Alrighty. I think everything's there. Right, good. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. Go through a few of the arguments in there. So this book just came out last year, right around this time. I remember because I wrote Jonathan to ask, because I was like, I really want to talk about it in my class. Can I have an advanced copy of the book? And I did not get an answer, so I was mildly upset because I then had to read it frantically to try and get everything in. So it's a really interesting book, sort of hit bestseller status, as I said last time, which has sort of led people to accuse Jonathan of catastrophizing at times in order to sell more books. I don't think that's fair. From my reading of his intentions, maybe he's just another huckster. I don't really think so. That said, this is the cover of the British version of the book, which I really like compared to the American one. Why? Like a little astronaut floating in a sea of emojis. I don't know why. It just makes me smile. Okay. I often find the British covers of books are just much better than the American ones. There's like 5 left. Okay, if people stopped booking appointments to come talk to me, I would have been done like a week ago. I will be done. I will not leave before I finish marking this class. I will die in this very spot before leaving. I only have like 5 left. Like I said, if I could have like 25 minutes to myself, I could easily finish this. Okay. Maybe I need another sick day where I can sit and be sick and mark. Okay. So, oh, my Neil Postman obsession returns. Okay. By the way, Neil Postman, amongst one of the greatest names ever, because it is not only his name, but a grammatically correct sentence. If you think about it. Okay, so this is from the intro to a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I think it kind of resonates with the theme of Haidt's book. In short, Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us, right? And that's kind of, I think, the theme of the book, right? That basically one of the things that we love is sort of ruining us and really leading to a mental health crisis amongst our Gen Zers. Okay, so how am I doing for time? So we talked about the decline in mental health, right? We're looking at this, through that last unit. So why has it accelerated so quickly? Now, what Haidt, and this is true of Twenge as well, what they sort of presume is that for a change to be this big, you have to have some kind of major change in the environment, right? That basically big sociological changes, right, your hockey stick shaped graphs, don't typically happen in a vacuum, right? We have bumpy graphs. Sociology has bumpy graphs, right? Things go up, things go down, things go up. And if increases happen, they happen in kind of a bumpy snake pattern, right? We've seen these much more kind of straightforward upward trajectories for a lot of negative mental health markers. I have squiggles on my screen. So we talk about this. Something has to have happened in the environment. And I think both of them, both Twenge and Haidt, kind of cue in on this key period between 2010 and 2014 as where those changes started. And what they kind of put it down to, right, is the widespread introduction of smartphones and social media. Now, I think what they sort of agree on is that, and I mean, you can look at literature, say, from Dr. Leonard Sachs as well, who's talked about this in his book on both boys and girls. Boys on the edge, girls on the brink. I can't remember. It's either boys on the brink, girls on the edge, or the reverse. They're interesting books nonetheless. That social media especially, already had its problems prior to the introduction of smartphones. And I remember reading Sachs's book on girls, and he would be talking about how girls would sit at their computers at night, crafting their social media profiles, for maximum likes. And that this was a major problem for girls already prior to really smartphones coming into the marketplace. But the combination of smartphones and social media, is a sort of magic sauce in the sense that it makes social media sort of all pervasive, right? It sort of brings it with you everywhere you go at every moment of every day. It's not suddenly this thing that's on a computer, that is at your house or that you're not on all the time. It's this thing that's in your pocket and it's buzzing and it's, letting you know that there are new notifications and all of that jazz. So yeah, it's a bit of a problem. So smartphone ownership, right, amongst teens particularly, jumps from 23% 2011 to 79% in 2016. Okay, these are different numbers than Twenge had. These are numbers from, I think this is Pew that they took the numbers from. So this number is lower than what Twenge thought for kind of 2012. Okay, so Haidt cites this 2015 Common Sense Media study and this 2015 Pew report, and comparing it to what was going on a couple of years ago. Now, 2015 is already a decade ago, right? But by 2015, Common Sense Media said that teens with a social media account spent on average 2 hours a day online, and that by in 2015, a quarter, so we got 25% of teens said they were online almost constantly, And by 2022, this number had increased to 46%. Okay, so that is, a lot. That's almost constantly, means they're constantly connected. Okay, and what Haidt says, and again, this is similar to things that Sherry Turkle has said, in her book Alone Together. Oh, together, I can spell. And another one called Reclaiming Conversation, which I used to lecture on. Oh no. I gripped my pen too hard and I pushed the button. Right, so Turkle talked about this in both these books, that smartphones have this weird quality, is that for those who have them, right, who are constantly online, they're here in person, but their consciousness is elsewhere, right? They're constantly kind of thinking out in the world. And Turkle really talks about this as like a constant kind of, FOMO, fear of missing out problem. That because they can't enjoy the here and now, right? They can't enjoy the moments they're in because they're aware that there's this whole world going on around them all the time, right? So their consciousness is always kind of elsewhere. And it's funny, like I, by my son's reckoning, am the worst and meanest parent ever, sometimes. I'll talk about how I banned him from Fortnite recently because it was out of control. But, he's 12, and all of his friends have Discord and Snapchat and all of this stuff. And he doesn't even have a phone. And we have a very strong rule that in our house that you don't get any social media until you're 16 at the very least. And when they ask me why, I'm like, because research. And he's like, what research? And I'm like, Jonathan Haidt. So Jonathan is the least popular person in my house. But I can always blame Jonathan Haidt for everything. And I'm like, let me read you from a chapter of The Anxious Generation as your bedtime story tonight, my son. But already, he's not even on social media. He's aware that his friends are, right? He's aware that his friends are on Discord. He's aware that they have these Snap conversations that he's not a part of. And so already, without even having it, he's like thinking about the elsewhere all the time, right? Like, what am I missing? What am I missing out on because I'm not on these platforms? And this gets worse when you have them. Okay. Sorry. This picture makes me laugh because I've never quite understood the appeal of taking pictures of your food and posting it. It just doesn't, it seems dumb to me. But then, like, I'm so that zennial, like, edge of Gen X that I just don't get it. And Instagram has never made any sense to me. But I have friends who are a couple of years younger than me who are, like, clearly, addicted to Instagram. And one friend who honestly said, I think Instagram knows me better than my husband because it suggests to her, like, all of these products that she's like, oh, I do want that. And I'm like, okay, maybe detach. I have my own pathologies. I'm clearly sort of addicted to the constant flow of X and the horrors that I find upon it. So I am not without my pathologies. Okay, so one of the key moments that Haidt points to is the coming of Instagram. And this is especially important for teen girls. Okay, so way back in, before the dawn of time, in the year 2010, when many of you were in kindergarten, I presume, or at least in elementary school, or not even. I could check your dates of birth, but I'm not going to do that. It's all on bear tracks. Also, it's kind of depressing. One of the weird things about being here and being a professor is I get older, you all stay the same age forever, because you're just going to leave when you get 22, and I get to stay here and just get older. And a new batch of 19-year-olds will show up. Okay, so June 2010, the iPhone 4 launches, and it is the first phone with a front-facing camera. So it launches the selfie revolution. I remember I got an iPhone 4. That was my first smartphone. It was pretty great at the time. Now it seems comically old and bad. The same month, Samsung launched the first Galaxy S phone, also with a front-facing camera. Okay, I mean, that in itself, right, you can take selfies, no big deal. Haidt says the same year, Instagram launched. And I just crossed out an important line of text. Oh, fat pen, how I love you. There we go. Okay, so 2012, it's purchased by Facebook. And it grows from 10 million to 90 million users by early 2013, right? So basically, Facebook makes it so your Facebook account, and Facebook at the time was the biggest social media platform, your Facebook account automatically gets you an Instagram account, and the thing sort of blows up. Okay. And selfie-based social media emerged in two ways, or in several ways. Teen girls leaned into online social media platforms that were selfie-based, right? Especially Instagram. Instagram became kind of, in a lot of ways, the girl platform. Teen girls really flocked to it in a way that teen boys didn't as much. And while girls were leaning into online social media platforms, especially Instagram, boys engaged with video games, YouTube, I'm actually shocked always how male-centric YouTube is. It's a much more male-centric platform. And I just assume that any content you want is on YouTube. But in weird ways, when you start to look at it, you realize how male-centric it is. Reddit. These two things could actually be the same, right? Reddit and hardcore pornography. It could just be like just Reddit hardcore pornography, because I think the entire purpose of Reddit is just to distribute hardcore pornography. So, do we take the and out? But these are the kind of boy, these are the sort of boy ways. And so Reddit, right, would be that key social media platform, as is YouTube, right? And certainly, right, I have a 12-year-old boy. I can say, God, he loves watching other people play video games on YouTube. I have still not figured out why. But I'm like the old person now. I'm like, why don't you just play the games yourself? He's like, you just don't get it. I'm like, no. That is clearly the problem with this conversation, is I don't get it. It seems dumb to me. God, I'm old. Okay. It'll happen to you someday too. It's not fun. Okay. So how am I doing for time? Oh, so I'm caught in my jokes again. I'm sorry. All right. So what Haidt kind of will stress in the large part of the book, and the big kind of crux of the argument, is that fundamentally, okay, so that's an interesting anecdote. My iPhone 4. I mean, not just my iPhone, that's very specific. Okay, so we're going to make a distinction between two things, right? We're going to talk about this in a sec, a phone-based childhood versus a play-based childhood. And what Haidt will say is that a play-based childhood has been the kind of norm for human beings, essentially forever, right? This is, essentially the way mammals are wired, right? So, and trust me, I have a 5-year-old too. I have a weird spread in terms of the age of my children. And trust me, 5-year-old really wants to play all the time. Like all mammals, humans are wired for play, right? And we see this in mammalian behavior, right? You ever see those adorable nature documentaries where they have like baby foxes, right? And it's like, watch as they're always a British person narrating, right? Watch as the baby foxes practice jumping on the dead bird, right? Or catching the cricket, right? I swear, I should narrate British nature documentaries. My accent is that good. Mammals are wired for play, right? Juvenile mammals learn from play, right? That is what they do, especially when they're young. And if they aren't allowed to play, most mammalian species come out socially or cognitively or emotionally impaired. Basically, they become Andrew Tate. Sorry, I'm being mean to Andrew, which is perfectly fair because he's an awful human being. Right? We see this in mammalian behavior, right? Play is how you learn how to navigate your environment, right? And, you figure out like social norms, how hard you can hit someone, how rough you can play with someone, social roles, like what are appropriate social roles. Human beings learn an enormous amount from play, more so even than animals, right? Animals learn how to hunt and survive. Human beings learn how to navigate social environments by playing with others, playing with their parents, playing with older siblings, right? It's tremendously important to play. And if you don't do it, right, and we know this, right, we have our our Romanian orphans and our Russian orphans, that were put into these very kind of repressive state-run institutions that didn't get that kind of, especially play with adults, and they come out with all sorts of social and cognitive impairments, right? Okay, now, sorry. I think of, when I see this point, I think of my 5-year-old, and it's the best because it's the worst. So even joking, teasing, gossiping, give them lessons in nuance, nonverbal cues that are key to social skills, right? You can think of things like joking, right? Teasing, gossiping, all as sorts of verbal play, right? And I especially think of joking, right? You find out how to make people laugh, how to get reactions out of people, how to navigate social environments. The reason I laugh is because my 5-year-old tries to tell knock-knock jokes, but he has no plan, right? Like he doesn't know where the joke ends. So he'll just randomly introduce something like knock, knock, who's there? Dr. Mario. And it's like, where's this going? And it goes nowhere, right? There's no punchline. And it's hilarious. But he's practicing, right? He's learning how to joke. What's funny, right? What's funny? What's witty? How do you talk to people? How do you navigate things, right? And kind of that verbal jousting that even between, you and your siblings, right? If you're like my kids, you attempt to verbally disembowel each other and leave the other person knowing that they are human garbage and not worth your time. That's my eldest and my middle child. They have an interesting relationship. And most of their interactions are like, you're garbage. No, you're garbage. You're more garbagey than I am. Okay, well, let's separate you into different houses. Okay. Oh, so yeah, these are all really important things that teach social skills, right? Okay, and here's his key one. And here is the word for height that you have to remember. I'm going to highlight it. Risk. Play with others, especially play with some degree of risk, teaches children how not to get hurt, right? What are some of the physical limitations, right? Okay, in this type of play, so I mean, when kids play together, right, there's some degree of risk, right? When they go to the playground, when they're playing tag or sledding down a hill, right, or whatever it happens to be, wrestling, roughhousing, right, there's some degree of risk, right? There's some degree of harm. You might make people angry, you might hurt yourself, you might hurt others, but it's not very costly, right? It is kind of low cost at the end of the day. Okay, and the other thing, I'm just gonna keep my highlighter, play is embodied, synchronous, right? So it's happening in real time and your body's actually there. The purple one never works out. And either one-to-one or one-to-several, right? So it's in the real world, right? It is your body doing things in real time, synchronously, all together. Now, he distinguishes this from phone-based childhood, which has some different qualities, right? It's disembodied, asynchronous, and one-to-many. Maybe one to very, very many, right? So we'll talk about that, but we understand this. Okay. Don't worry, there's always hope. I mean, I don't know what it is, but I'm sure there is hope. I'm just here to tell you all the doom. That's my job. And then I'm hoping one of you has a great solution to it someday. Okay, I was raised by YouTube. Oh, I was gonna make a Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney joke, but maybe I should not. Okay, so I'm sure they don't have the solution. That's what I was gonna say. All right, so the alternative, right, is phone-based childhood. And he thinks this is broadly, and I think you could probably say, kind of screen-based childhood in general. And this is, I think, what he thinks has happened essentially, since the sort of smartphone revolution, though I think we can trace it back further, right? We can trace it back to the 80s with cable television, right, and Putnam's thesis, in Bowling Alone, forward to, the internet and all of these things. Generally speaking, we've seen kind of changes. All right, so what's on our chart? Meetups with friends daily, right, we see a decline. Percent of US students, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade, who say they meet up with their friends almost every day, right? So declines, from almost 60% for boys and, let's say 50-ish% for girls, down, down, down for both. So people see their friends a lot less, right? Meet up with their friends a lot less. Okay, so what is Height? Oh, I got 4 minutes. That's okay. Height talks about phones and other screens as actually experience blockers, right? They actually stop us from having, new experiences out in the real world. Now he'll say, right, they do open new types of experiences, right? You can be, a 6-foot-tall duck with a gun trying to shoot players who are building elaborate structures on an island that you got to by jumping out of a bus. I'm not sure that's a valuable experience, but it is an experience of sorts, right? So you can get all sorts of experiences from the internet. But what he suggests is that there's an opportunity cost, right? Each minute you spend on your phone is a minute not spent in the real world. And for young people especially, that's the world that your brain was evolved to kind of deal with. Okay, so life online, right? What is life online and why is it potentially problematic? Well, according to Height, there's a sort of permanence in life online. And I think about the difference here between, being out on the playground with your friends, and saying something stupid, getting into a fight with someone, and it sort of, happens on the playground, and then, it's sort of gone, right? Because there's no permanence to it. It's ephemeral. It fades away as people forget about it, right? Most people are going to move on from whatever happened on the playground. But online, there's a kind of permanence, right? And we've seen lots of cases where young people maybe said something stupid, right? Said an inappropriate word on the internet, right? Or on their Snapchat or Instagram or something, right? And that sort of follows them on later. We've seen student athletes, right, who used, say, racial epithets when they were really young, like 13 years old, have their scholarships to, their sports scholarships to universities canceled when someone who didn't like them brought that to the attention of the university they'd been accepted to, right? These things have happened. So what he suggests is social media sort of turns young people into brand managers. Rather than living in the here and now, they're often thinking about how they craft that image because it has a sort of permanence. Okay, so less time spent with people, right? We talked about this at the beginning of the course, right? For Gen Z, it's about 1.5 hours more per day of leisure time, but that's almost all spent on screens. Okay. So, phones blunt attachment or attunement to your environment in numerous ways. Okay. 1, parents are more distracted. Twingie talks about this in her, not Twingie, Turkle talks about this in her book, Reclaiming Conversation. One of the top complaints that kids have about their parents is they're on their phones all the time, right? Distracted, even at dinner. And they don't follow their own rules. They're like, no, it's like, no phones at the table. No, I'm playing Block Breaker. That doesn't count. Right, so parents are more distracted. They have less synchronous time with friends and peers, right? Doing things like hanging out, being silly, dancing, singing, shared cultural experiences, right? They're experiencing all of those things on their own. Sorry, I just had this funny thought that popped in my head, and I'll tell you about it very quickly. So less common experiences like rituals, right? Less things they do together. I had a student come into my office, and we're having a meeting, and I had Spotify open on my phone because I had been listening to something on Spotify, and they walked into my office, and after like 3 minutes of them being there, it was like, do you want to join this person's jam? And I'm like, who the heck is that? It's the student standing right next to me. So Spotify knew we were in the same space and was like, you must be friends. Do you want to listen to the same music? I'm like, okay, that's a little odd. And we're all going to die. Okay, so the robots know it all. All right, so let's pick up from here on Wednesday. we'll do our thing. I'll try to mark